Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving, and sometimes running fast if you're the Car Chick. Now, here she is.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Straight Shift. Today we're going to talk about exploding sunroofs. Yes, that is actually a thing. It's not just an urban myth. And I decided to do this podcast because it actually happened to someone I know. One of my friends on Facebook was just driving down the highway all innocently and within the speed limit one day in her Honda CR-V, and she heard this loud explosion. And her first thought was that she had blown a tire. But the vehicle was not wobbling or, doing any of the crazy things that vehicles do when you do blow a tire. But then she noticed there was glass in her lap and on her shirt and on her shoulders and in the passenger seat. So she gets off the highway and pulls over and looks up, and lo and behold, there is a giant gaping hole in her sunroof and glass is everywhere. It had fallen back down into the car, in the front seat, in the back seat, on the sunroof cover. And all she could think about was, thank goodness her two small children were not in the car when that happened. Now, this may seem like a freak occurrence, but exploding sunroofs really is a thing. And it's becoming an increasing problem as the years go by. And it's not just here in the United States. This is literally happening all over the world in nearly every country where you have automobiles. And it's not limited to just one vehicle or one manufacturer. It's happening to all different manufacturers, all different kinds of vehicles on different types of roads, from highways to country roads. It's even happened to people while their car was just sitting there by itself, doing nothing in their driveway. And all of a sudden, bluey, the sunroof just does a spontaneous high-speed disassembly and glass goes everywhere like there was a bomb in the car. So what the heck? What is going on here? And what makes this worse is, even though it doesn't happen nearly as frequently as, say, a tire blowout, but it still presents a very significant safety hazard because, not only is the driver at risk of, getting flying shards of glass, in their head, in their face, etc. And thankfully, there have not been too many injuries and none of them have been severe and there have been no deaths. But can you imagine driving down the road and your sunroof explodes and glass rains down on your head? You're probably not going to react real calmly. So, that's a big way for, that poor driver to inadvertently cause an accident just because they just had the crap scared out of them. And what makes this worse is that the automakers are not doing anything about it. They're not even acknowledging that there is a problem in most cases, much less investigating it and trying to resolve the issue, with a few exceptions, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So, I want to talk about why this is happening, which vehicles have the most occurrences, and, what can you do if this happens to happen to you? American car owners have filed nearly 1,000 complaints with the federal government about exploding sunroofs. About 71 of those have been filed since 2011. And I know that sounds like a totally insignificant number, but it is very, very likely, like 99.9% certain, that this is a vastly underreported issue. Relatively few people go through the process and the trouble of filing a claim with the federal government. I mean, I file one of those reports every time a stupid scammer or telemarketer calls me when they're not supposed to because I'm on the dang do not call list. But I don't do it every single time because it takes my time. So many people that have had these problems and have other problems with their vehicles, they don't go through the trouble of filing a report with the government. But if you look on different car forums, and complaints online, people are certainly complaining about it. It's certainly happening. It's just hard to find out, exactly how often it's happening because the data is just not in good places. And the manufacturers are doing a really good job of trying to suppress that data as well. The details of the reports that we do have, though, are extraordinarily similar and consistent to what my friend experienced. Just sunroof suddenly shattering, exploding for no apparent reason, no direct known cause. There have been, fortunately, only 36 reports of people being injured, and it's mostly just cuts and scrapes. But a lot of those, people have been the children that are riding in these cars. And I don't know if you can imagine, it's not a lot of fun to drive around with a 2-year-old in your backseat anyway. But imagine a sunroof exploding and raining broken glass down on top of the head of your toddler. That's going to freak any parent out. But what's interesting is that, the majority of the reports on this state that this sunroof exploding incident actually occurred within the first year or two of the car's life. So this is not just happening to old cars where you might think, oh, well, maybe the car was in an accident and it's losing its structural integrity or the sunroof is old. No, this is happening to new vehicles, and that actually poses a whole slew of problems for car owners. The National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration, if you remember my podcast about recalls, that's our governing regulatory body that governs all things traffic and highway safety. Imagine that. And they have been studying this exploding sunroof problem since 2011. And then back in 2017, Consumer Reports did their own independent research and study to get a little bit more information on it to try and raise awareness of this problem to automotive consumers. And really, in the last 8 years that these investigations have been going on, there's still no definitive cause, especially one that can be really proven beyond doubt in a courtroom. But we have noticed that the problem has been getting worse since sunroofs have been getting bigger. Now, if you go back as far as 1995, there are reports of this happening. But since, really 2011, dramatically 2012, 2013, the reports have gone from just a handful a year and shot up to like 200 a year. And that's when about 2012, 2013 is when these bigger, what's now called a panoramic sunroof have started showing up in vehicles. And, I love the panoramic sunroofs. Who doesn't? They are so cool. Pretty much like the entire top of your car is glass. And I've always enjoyed, I've got a really big ass sunroof in my '04 Mini Cooper S Maggie. And that's one of the things that I loved about her, having to, give up my previous convertible when I bought her. So, that I've always enjoyed having a big sunroof. And, I've never had any problems with it. And fortunately, Mini doesn't have a lot of reported incidents around these. But really in 2012, 2013 is when a lot of the manufacturers started thinking, oh, what if we put a sunroof in the back, for the passengers of these big SUVs? Ooh, what if we make the sunroof really bigger? Let's just see if we can make the entire roof of the car completely out of glass. They did that because people are willing to pay thousands of dollars to have that. So it was a business decision, of course. But did they do the safety research to see if it was a good idea? Because, folks, just because something can be done doesn't necessarily mean that it should be done. And that's really, Hyundai and Kia, they're kind of at the top of the list of manufacturers that have had problems. And it makes sense because they were one of the first to bring out these panoramic sunroofs. And, while the National Highway Traffic Association is continuing to analyze the data, which it's been like pulling teeth for them to even get the automakers to share any data whatsoever, because the automakers do not want to admit that they have a defect in their product. But they're still trying to analyze this, and they've been working on this since 2011, and it's still quite a bit of a mystery. But if you think about it, think about what glass is made out of. Sunroofs are made from tempered glass. And tempered glass is great. It's a lot stronger than normal glass. It's not the stuff that you drink your beer out of. It's the stuff that, windows and buildings are made out of. It's very, very strong. And when you put it in a small flat sunroof like we used to have in cars, it works great. There's no problem. But guess what? Sunroofs are neither small nor flat anymore. And unfortunately, the safety standards and the regulatory oversight from our government of sunroofs hasn't remotely kept pace with the design and implementation in the automotive industry of these new sunroofs. As is typical, technology and, the business of making money off that technology is always going to proceed a lot faster and develop faster than, our safety regulators can run after it and try and catch up. So, the construction industry, for buildings, they went through this too. Remember, buildings used to be made of actual, concrete and things like that. But over the years, as the technology got better and they were able to develop things like tempered glass, you start seeing these skyscrapers that look like they're literally made of nothing but glass. And you have these beautiful floor to ceiling windows in the office buildings in these skyscrapers. And that is tempered glass, but they have a lot more regulation in the construction industry. And furthermore, that glass, it's usually on a flat surface. It doesn't have to curve, although some buildings they do. It's not moving. It doesn't have to open and close like a sunroof does. So it's really a very different situation. But the biggest thing is that there are more safety regulations in the construction of buildings and that industry than there is in the glass and some parts of car making in the automotive industry. Now, kind of to make matters worse, when you're talking about making these panoramic sunroofs, and if the whole roof of the car is essentially glass, the mechanism that opens and closes the sunroof, there's mechanical parts in there. There's little motors and stuff. And when you had small sunroofs, it was easy to hide all of those mechanical components that made the sunroof work inside the metal of the rest of the roof of the car. But if you have a big nothing but glass roof of the car, where do you hide that stuff? Because we don't, as consumers, we don't want to see these magical mechanisms that open and close the sunroof. We just want them to work. Manufacturers like Hyundai and Kia have created a manufacturing process that's known as ceramic printing. And what that does is it coats parts of the glass of the sunroof, making those areas darker so that it kind of shades and covers and hides all those mechanical parts that make the sunroof work, which sounds great. That's why when you see these panoramic sunroofs, you'll see some of the areas of the glass on the roof are darker than others. Literally, I have the same thing on my car. But the ceramic printing process also makes the glass weaker, and therefore it's going to be more vulnerable to shattering. And, I'm afraid that, if the automotive industry just does what it's always done, looking at trends, they never do anything about a problem like this until the government forces the issue, until the regulators come knocking on the door and say, you know what, guys, there's a problem and you have ignored it long enough. And now we are stepping in and you will do something about this. But because they haven't been able to find, a definite cause that really proves for certain that there are defects in the manufacturing process, and because it's so different across all manufacturers, all of their roof designs and sunroof designs and their process for making them are so different, it's really hard to find a specific cause. And this is getting the automakers kind of out of taking responsibility for the fact that, guess what? There is a problem. You look at the data in the big picture across all manufacturers, all makes and models, all parts of the world, sunroofs explode. So there is a problem. But they're not going to do anything about it until they're forced to, because they don't want to spend the money. It's all about the bottom line. Now, fortunately, some other countries, not every country has safety regulations, like we do. In fact, very few countries do. But the South Korean government has kind of been paying attention, because obviously Hyundai and Kia are some of their biggest exports, and it's so critical to their economy. And they also just kind of the Asian tradition of, honor and not, wanting to look bad. They want to save face. Their safety regulators have stepped up and actually asked the United Nations body that's in charge of global transport regulations, typically around, air and shipping, trains, but really any type of global transportation. They've asked them to look into developing new safety standards for glass that would be used in all vehicles around the world. And of course, the US regulators are cooperating. And there's actually this new group called the UN's Working Group on Panoramic Sunroofs. You don't really think about that as being under the purview of the United Nations. I think of the United Nations as, enforcing, what is a war crime and what is not, and trying to keep the world peace and working with NATO to make sure we don't all blow ourselves up with nuclear bombs. But apparently they've had to step in and get involved with panoramic sunroofs. So that may give you an indication of how widespread this problem is globally, and yet how underreported it is. So I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the technologies that are being investigated and tested out to try and make this glass safer, and what is the true cost to the consumer, especially for folks that this has happened to, and what can you do if it happens to you. So I'll be right back after this. Do you hate car shopping? Do you worry about being taken advantage of or about finding the right car at a great price? Buying a car can be a frustrating and time-consuming experience. But what if you could get a great deal without having to do a ton of research, without having to haggle, and without the fear of buying a lemon? You can. As your personal car shopper, the Car Chick will help you pick the perfect car based on your unique lifestyle, budget, and personality. She'll handle all of the legwork and negotiating for you. All you have to do is sign the papers and take the keys. It's that easy. To learn how the Car Chick can save you time, money, and hassle on your next car purchase, give us a call at 704-248-8706. That's 704-248-8706. Or visit us on the web at thecarchick.com.
Where the rubber meets the road.
Nice to meet you. Love your asphalt.
Hey, nice treads.
It's Straight Shift with the Car Chick.
Welcome back to The Straight Shift. We are talking about exploding sunroofs today. Not a sentence that I ever thought would come out of my mouth when I got into the automotive industry, but hey, never a dull moment. So we're seeing more and more of these occurrences with exploding sunroofs, particularly as these panoramic sunroofs are becoming so incredibly popular and are finding their way into so many different types of vehicles on the market. And they're awesome. People are willing to pay for them, and it kind of it makes the vehicle feel so much less closed in. And especially if you're driving a 3-row SUV with a bunch of kids in the back, you want as much feeling of freedom as you can possibly get. But they're not without their risks. The tempered glass that is used to make sunroofs, that technology and the safety regulations just has not kept pace with the automotive designs. And tempered glass, while strong, is not strong enough to really withstand being bent and curved and molded to the aerodynamic form of the car roofs these days. And then, they make matters worse by treating it with different processes to try and hide the look of all the mechanics that go with it. But there are some things that are being done, and there are some manufacturers who haven't completely buried their heads in the sand and are denying this. One possible solution, at least in the interim, to try and make these sunroofs a little bit safer is to use laminated glass. That's a process where basically you take the two panes of glass are fused with a sheet of plastic around it that's designed not to break, even if the glass inside it shatters. So it would at least contain the explosion. It wouldn't necessarily prevent the tempered glass from shattering, but it would keep it from going kablooey and blowing glass, all over hell and half of Georgia and all over you and your passengers. Ford has been experimenting with this, and they're using laminated glass in some of their models. And Volvo, Volvo's one manufacturer that they have always put safety first, and I will commend them for that. They have patented a design for laminating sunroof glass to keep the sunroof from shattering and even to help try and keep the glass from breaking in the event the vehicle rolls over. Because that's honestly been the focus of the regulation around sunroofs since they started coming out and since we started bothering to have safety regulations for cars. But, one of the biggest concerns is, if you think about it, if you're in an accident that's bad enough to flip your car and your car rolls over, there's a hole in your roof that you can easily be ejected out of, as if you needed another reason to wear your seatbelt. But, they're also concerned with, when the car rolls over, obviously that sunroof glass is going to be subjected to extreme stress and it's probably going to break, thus making the situation even worse. And if the whole roof or this giant panoramic sunroof is in a rollover situation, that's just really not going to end well. So primarily the lamination process for the sunroof glass has been focused on making it safer in a rollover situation. But if it does what it's supposed to do and holds that glass together, hopefully it will not break and it will, keep people from getting injured or the glass from going everywhere in the event that the glass does explode. But one of the biggest problems for consumers is, with the manufacturers denying this problem. Now you get into a situation with, if this happens to you, who pays for it? Because here's what happens. The manufacturers, for the most part, are denying that this problem exists. They're denying that there is a defect in their product. Because, of course, that would make them liable under the warranty laws. They're blaming things like road debris, projectiles, weather conditions. Honestly, flying rocks are the number one scapegoat that the manufacturers are using to deny the warranty claims. So in addition to, going through the trauma of having part of your car explode on you while you're driving down the road and, having glass rain down upon you and perhaps you or your children or your family are injured, the manufacturers pour salt in your wound by then making you financially responsible for an exploding sunroof. Like you could have prevented that in any way, shape, or form. One consumer had the sunroof on his 2015 Toyota Venza spontaneously explode while driving down a remote highway one day. The car was only a year old at the time it happened, so still under warranty. And when he took it to the dealership, the technician tried to say, oh, well, this was caused by a rock hitting the sunroof. Really? A rock? Okay. This guy, he was not stupid, and he called total BS on this. The technician was trying to say, oh, well, you must have been behind another vehicle that threw a rock up on you. Okay, first of all, there were no other vehicles around this gentleman. He was literally on, wide open road, nobody around him. And so it was not caused by another vehicle. So even if it had been another vehicle, I don't know about you, but I have had, big trucks, other cars, whatever on the highway in front of me. And yeah, they've kicked up rocks. And guess what it hits? Your windshield. It doesn't go flying up into the air and then immediately comes straight back down onto the top of your sunroof, breaking your sunroof. The laws of physics say that can't even happen. And so he pointed this out, and then the technician tried to say, well, you probably hit it with your own tire then, and it kicked up. Really? How stupid do you think we are? If your own vehicle hits a rock with your own tire, that rock gets kicked backwards. It doesn't fly up in the air and hit your own sunroof. It hits the windshield or the front of the car behind you. So again, that's a whole lot of BS. They're also trying to claim that, in extreme cold. Dude, it was 65 degrees out. Really? This is happening in all areas of the world, whether it's hot or it's cold, whether you're on freeway, country road. I mean, just sitting in your own driveway, unless, some kid hits a baseball up in the air and it happens to come straight down onto your car. It takes a lot of force to break a sunroof. I mean, I have literally seen, baseballs bounce off of the sunroof of a car before in a parking lot at a ball field, and that did not break the sunroof. But here's, where you kind of get into some forensics. And, I love watching all the crime scene investigation stuff. When these incidents happen, there is a gaping hole left in the sunroof, but the edges of that gaping hole are angled up. If something had fallen down on top of the car and caused that hole, the edges of that hole would be facing downward in the direction of where that falling object came from. But the simple fact that the edges, and this has been very consistent across all the reported incidents, the edges of that gaping hole are facing upwards, showing very clearly from a law of physics standpoint that something exploded out. So unless there was someone sitting in your back seat with a bazooka shooting a hole through your sunroof from inside the car, it was not caused by road debris or some sort of projectile from outside of the car. Yet the manufacturers are still claiming this. And, for a person to try and fight them when there's a warranty claim, that is a huge, protracted legal battle. And, all the dealerships make you sign, this arbitration clause when you buy cars these days. So, having to go to an arbitrator deciding, and, there's not an easy way to prove causality in the situations, because if there were, then the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, would have yielded more results in this 8-year investigation that's still ongoing. So what the dealers are doing is they're telling the consumer, this was caused by a projectile. It's your fault. It's an issue with your insurance company. Talk to your insurance company. Well, the insurance companies aren't stupid either. They have someone go look at it and they're like, yeah, that was caused by an explosion from the inside, not the outside. This is not, something that happened from road debris or, exterior projectile, not even an airplane falling on your car. They're saying this was the result of a faulty sunroof. It's the manufacturer's fault. The manufacturer has to deal with this. So the poor consumer, who's already been traumatized by their sunroof exploding while they're driving down the road, now has a busted ass car, and the manufacturer and the dealership and their insurance company are all pointing fingers at each other. And guess who gets to pay for it? The consumer. So consumers that have been fortunate enough where their insurance company has agreed to pay the claim, they have still been out of pocket for their deductible. So you can imagine this is really, really frustrating. And as a result, and as more and more of these have been occurring in the last several years, and I fully suspect that we're going to continue to see more of them unless the automakers are doing something to change their sunroof designs and keeping it a secret so that they don't have to admit that there was a problem in the first place. Obviously the U.S. law firms, mostly out of California, have seen an opportunity to file some class action lawsuits. And right now, Hyundai, Kia, Nissan, Ford, Mercedes, Volkswagen, and a number of other automakers all have class action lawsuits pending against them for exploding sunroofs. So again, this is happening, it's real, and it's not just one little isolated incident with just one or two manufacturers. And, the purpose of these lawsuits, other than obviously for the lawyers to make a bunch of money, is, they're seeking, damages that, compensation for these poor car owners who have had to pay these repairs out of pockets. And if you have to replace a sunroof, you're talking a minimum $900. Usually if it's a panoramic one, hello, you're talking a good $2,000 or so. So people are out of pocket money. The lawsuit will hopefully get some compensation for them, as well as compensation for the reduced value of their vehicle, because now their car's not worth as much if there's an incident showing, hey, the sunroof exploded. I mean, would you buy a used car with a history of an exploding sunroof? I certainly wouldn't. So in terms of the most likely culprits out there, of all the manufacturers, the top culprits that have had this happen to, a variety of their makes and models the most over the years: Hyundai, Ford, Nissan and Kia are at the top of the list. And it makes sense because these are the manufacturers that were the first ones to bring it out. The Hyundai Santa Fe was one of the first vehicles, its cousin, the Kia Sorento. Those were the first three-row SUVs on the market to come out with this panoramic sunroof. Ford brought out the giant dual-pane sunroof in the Ford Edge. Nissan started putting them in the Muranos. So these guys are guilty by being simply, kind of leading the technology, but, they've also been burying their heads in the sand for the most part. If you're looking at individual vehicles, surprisingly, the little Scion TC, which, Scion was the brand owned by Toyota that made, the Toaster and some other weird, low, kind of inexpensive vehicles, and it went away several years ago and got reabsorbed into Toyota. But the little Scion TC, that was their little, kind of two-seater coupe, little sporty car. Similarly, the Hyundai Veloster, which is also that weird little three-door coupe. Those are small cars. So you would think, why is it happening on the small cars? Well, here's my theory, and I didn't find any data to support this, but it makes logical sense. Because those cars are so small and their roof lines are very slopey, they're very curved. And so the fact that they have sunroofs means that tempered glass has to also be curved to fit that roof line and to move in and out of the little sunroof casing. So that's my theory on why those are at the top of the list, is because they had to curve that glass, and that glass did not like to be curved. Another big one, obviously I mentioned before, the Kia Sorento. Other culprits include the Nissan Murano, sedans like the Kia Optima and the Honda Accord, the Nissan Maxima, also the Ford Explorer, Cadillac SRX, the Mercedes SUVs. This is not just limited to one manufacturer. So, it's clearly a big problem across the board. Is this a reason for you to not purchase, one of these vehicles, or maybe to avoid purchasing a car with a panoramic sunroof? Only you can decide that. It probably wouldn't deter me, simply because, man, I really love those panoramic sunroofs. I might roll the dice and take my chances, but I just want people to be aware that there is an increased risk with those type of sunroofs. And, you just have to decide if, that risk is something that you and your family are willing to take on. Now, if you have one of these cars, or you choose to buy one of these cars, and the sunroof does explode, and clearly in the vehicle list that I gave you, it's not limited to the big SUVs with the pano roofs. I mean, if it's happening in a Honda Accord, it can happen to anything. But if you do find yourself in this situation, you may find yourself between that rock and the hard place, between the dealer denying the warranty and your insurance company denying the claim. Document everything that happens. I know if it happens to you while you're driving the car, it's probably going to freak the heck out of you, but try to document very carefully what happened, what time it is, was it day, time, weather conditions, what road were you on? What were the conditions around you? Were you in a lot of traffic? Were you not in a lot of traffic? Really document as many details as you can, and take a million pictures with your cell phone. Be sure to take those pictures of the hole in the sunroof, especially if it really clearly shows an upward force of explosion with the shards and the edges facing upward. Any documentation you have, could help you. If you've had this happen to you, just whatever your make and model vehicle is, just Google class action lawsuit exploding sunroof for that make and model and see which law firm is handling it. Most of them are out of California. And with a class action lawsuit, there's really not anything for you to actively do except keep your documentation and, sign up on that law firm's website to get email updates about the case. And then, that way, if the case is settled, or when the case is settled, and if there is compensation offered to the victims of it, believe me, the law firms want to find as many people as possible that they can prove had this problem, because the more people they have making these claims, the more money they make, because they get obviously a percentage of it. So, hopefully this will never happen to you, but my friend never thought it would happen to her either. So, just put that as one of your considerations when you're considering, buying a vehicle with any type of sunroof, but particularly if it's a small car that has a curved roof line. Some vehicles have a roof line that's so curved that they can't even put a sunroof in it, like the Porsche Cayman. Too slopey, they don't put sunroofs in those. The only downside of that vehicle. Or you're looking at buying one of these big honking SUVs that has the panoramic roof. Just know that this could potentially happen, and, make whatever decision you feel is best for you. All right, folks, thanks for listening to me ramble on about exploding sunroofs. It's just the most random topic I've ever talked about, but I want people to know about it so that you can make the decisions that are best for you. Whether you have a sunroof or not, drive safely. I'll see you next time.
The Straight Shift Podcast is copyright Leanne Shattuck, The Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of Leanne Shattuck or The Car Chick.